and welcome to the final chapter of It Hurts the Hope by Inquilatory on AO3. Chapter 32. Home. Grian wakes up slowly. It's a strange feeling to wake up so peacefully, and for a moment he simply lies still and lets himself sink into the pillows as his other senses steadily perk up. He can feel blankets underneath him, warm and soft. He can hear the occasional shifting of fabric and slow intake of breath, telling him he's not the only one out here. Blinking his eyes open, Grian sits up as slowly as possible, wincing as sore muscles stretch and ache. He rubs a hand down his face and finally looks around the room, baffled at the scene around him. As far as he can tell, he's in Exuma's base, in one of the spare living rooms that usually functions as storage. There's at least 5 shoulder boxes worth of wool spread across the floor. Fluffy and cloud-like, it seems as though every single blanket and pillow that exists on the server has been piled within these 4 walls. Everything that vaguely resembles a quilt or cushion snatched up and deposited in piles on the wool floor. The hermits sprawl out among the chaos, dead asleep and unlikely to wake any time soon. Ren is curled in a very wolf-like way against Doc, whose snores are just barely loud enough to be heard. Beat-Up sprawls on top of Cleo, Etho resting nearby with his head on Cleo's shoulder. False is far enough away that it's clear she wished to sleep alone, but Stress and Iskall seem to have invaded anyways, and one of her great wings is reluctantly dropped across them both. Tango, Impulse, and Zedaf have a whole fort in the corner, fashioned out of couch cushions and throw pillows. Impulse is a steady support at the center, with Tango acting as a human heater and Zedaf laying on top. Wells has, for once, taken off his shining silver armor and has one arm thrown over Beef, loose golden hair spilling across his face as he sleeps. The evolutionists are piled in one big group, Nettie in Martin's arms, and TARDIS on top of Jimmy, Bigby curled nearby under a veritable mountain of fluffy blankets. They cling to each other like they need to reassure themselves that the others haven't disappeared mid-sleep. At the center of the room is Grian, surrounded by several slumbering figures that obviously refused to move any further than absolutely had to. Mumbo sprawls to his left, a lanky pile of loose, long limbs and rumpled fabric, shirt untucked and missing his signature red tie. Scar curls around him, one arm thrown over the Redstoner's chest, with Jelly curled behind the bend of his knees. On his right, Pearl, brown hair tangled halo around her head, and wings carefully folded against her back. The slightest crunch between her eyebrows that ever persists, even when asleep. Beyond that is Exuma, helmet off and instead wearing a smaller mask-like respirator that only covers his mouth and nose. Corrales is tucked against his chest, and their breaths are calm and slow, inhaling and exhaling in quiet tandem. 25 hermits, 10 evolutionists, 2 watchers, and their listener ally. At the very middle is Grian. All of these things at the same time in some strange twist of fate. He breathes in deeply, and his wings shift behind him. Purple wings, as he's always aware, a deep dark purple, so unlike what they used to be, so unlike Evo. No, he corrects himself with a soft smile. So like me. Grian lies down again and spreads his wings. Purple arcing, feather-twisted wings across his friends, trying to cover them all at the same time. He slips back into sleep, but this time he isn't afraid of falling. The next time Green wakes up, it's a lot louder. There's shuffling and quiet murmurs as people move around the room, and suspicious pockets of empty air close to Green that signify someone has left the nest. How rude! Green needs them all to stay in his nest until he's completely sure that they're all safe and unharmed. He grumbles something under his breath and shimmies out from under a blanket. Reaching out with a questing hand, it brushes against an unknown arm, and he drags himself forward with a monumental heave, flopping onto someone's chest. The yelp that follows makes him smirk. He snuggles further into his victim with a disgruntled chirp. "Don't go," he mumbles, the words trailing off into another trill. Exuma chuckles and runs a hand through his hair, gently untangling the knots. An ungloved hand. Green can't help but notice. "I'm not going anywhere, my friend. Not anymore, at least." Good. Green pulls an arm out from under his chest and throws it upward, impossibly heavy for just one limb. It flops back down somewhere between Exuma's shoulder and neck, and he is satisfied by that. Exuma laughs again and cards gentle fingers through Green's wing. The cool touch sends shivers down his spine, a welcome feel between the tangled feathers. "Someone's going to have to preen these," Exuma mutters, and Green hums in agreement. "Uh-oh, did you get ambushed?" someone asks from high above. Green peels open one eye to glance upwards. Pearl stands next to them, looking down with laughing eyes and a crooked smile. It's the sight of that smile, Pearl's smile, subtle and slight, a little crescent moon of happiness, that makes Green finally realizes that he's actually here. He made it. He's home. Heaving a yawn that practically shakes his wings, Green reluctantly hauls himself off Exuma, sitting back with his feet tucked under him as he stretches his arms high above his head. Most of the room has emptied, he notices, though Team Zit is still fast asleep in the corner. Tango is snoring loud enough to crumble bastions, but that doesn't seem to bother Impulse and Zed. Green snickles as Impulse's arm flops out and over Tango's face, who promptly continues his muffled snoring from under his friend's hand. Pearl sits down next to Green, reaching out with a hand to gently guide his wing out. Green lets her, humming as she starts to straighten matted feathers with deft hands. He turns to Exuma in the silence, the admin sitting up and adjusting the respirator that covers his mouth and nose. "What happened?" he asks without preamble, and Exuma's eyes flash up to meet his. Hesitation seems to strain at his expression, so Green speaks before he can. "I'd like to know. I can handle it." Something in his voice seems to work, or maybe it's the memories, carving new lines into his skin. The experience and knowledge that he relearned in that second of eternity. Whatever the reason, Exuma looks into his eyes and gives in. He sighs and twines his hands together, the pale shattering scars shifting as his fingers tighten. Green listens as the admin begins to tell a story that played out at the same time that his own did. It's a story of family, desperately racing to save one of their own, fighting against the clock and the universe itself to find their way back to their lost friend. It's a story of sleepless nights and exhausted days, pulling through code and maps and ancient books. It's a story of love for a brother and hate for the ones who took him away. It's a story of never giving up. Grian is crying by the end of it. He can't help it. The shaking shoulders, heaving chest, streaming tears as he silently sobs. He tips forward and flings his arms around Exuma, wings snapping away from Pearl's grasp, to instead wrap around his admin. "Thank you," he chokes out, struggling to pull himself together so he can actually speak. His attempts fail and he just cries harder. "Thank you. Came. You came back for me. You came. You thank." Exuma hums something soothing, not quite words, but not quite music, and returns the embrace. "We always will," he promises, and for the first time in a very, very long while, Grian believes him. He believes that he is safe. After preening his wings, with lots of help from Pearl and Jimmy, Grian finally feels up to untangling himself from the pile of blankets that was constructed around him. "We obviously weren't about to touch your actual nest, so we just made another one," Jimmy explains when Grian picks up what is obviously one of Zedef's sweaters, woven into the blankets along with a variety of other cloths. Why?" he asks, bewildered. Jimmy shrugs and sticks his hands in his pockets. "We figured it'd be better to have things your avian side would recognize when you woke up. So you wouldn't try and skedaddle or something." "Bold of you to assume my panicked response is to skedaddle," Grian replies haughtily. And Jimmy laughs. "Also, hold up. Skedaddle?" he repeats again. As they make their way over to the door, most of the others have already deserted the room, so he doesn't have trouble keeping his voice low. "Have you been hanging around Tango?" "A little," Jimmy admits with a lopsided smile. "It would have been pretty hard not to get all chummy with these guys, considering we spent over a week living in the same base." "We spent over a week living in the same base. Over a week? That's how long I was gone?" Grian asks. Suddenly quiet. Jimmy goes impossibly silent next to him. "Yeah," he admits, reaching to open the door and standing aside so Grian can go through. It wasn't pretty. I'll admit, half of us were stuck just trying to keep the other half alive." Despite the somber mood that suddenly enveloped them, Grian chokes out a laugh. He can imagine more clearly than he'd like. Exuma and Doc and Impulse, refusing to eat or sleep or breathe too deeply, buried elbows deep in their work. He's seen it happen countless times, but it's never been because of him. It's never been this serious. Jimmy leads the way down the hall, traversing the corridors in a way that tells Grian he's had a lot of time to grow acquainted with Exuma's base. It's rather strange to see his brother here on Hermitcraft, but it brings him a strange kind of solace at the same time. He can't help the warmth that bubbles in his chest. Both of his families are here right now. Both of his families are safe. They turn a corner into a new room, and Grian freezes on the doorstep. Jimmy immediately doubles back to check if he's okay, concern spilling from his lips, but Grian simply holds up a shaking hand and tries to blink the sudden tears from his eyes. Exuma's base is chaos. Players spill from every corner, chaotic and unorganized and joyful. Mumbo hovers over the stoves in the kitchen, sleeves rolled up and black hair dusted with either flour or a copious amount of salt, frantically checking bubbling pots and sizzling pans. Wells hovers next to him, pulling cake out of the oven without any kind of gloves. Green panics before realizing that his gauntlets provide enough protection from the heat. Separated from the kitchen by a half wall, the dining room is mostly taken up by a huge table with 40 odd chairs around it, each one just as colorful and bright as the people occupying them. It doesn't take Green very long to realize that most of the chairs are the ones from their monthly meetings. He spots Impulse's wires and screens futuristic armchair next to Tinkle's mechanical flame motif chair, next to Cleo's patchwork padded chair, claimed by vines, next to Hypno's black leather and gold highlight one. Martin has a simple oak chair that's covered in green branches, right next to Wren's extravagant velvet inlaid throne. Pearl sits in a seat that's been covered in silver and gold streamers, little moon charms, and star stickers. The one next to hers is a riot of colors, pom-poms, flowers, and glitter. Presumably Jimmy's, and not by choice. Across the table, wars are being fought and lost. Impulse has Tango in a headlock, sticking marshmallows into the Netherborn's hair to set them on fire. Tango is yelling something garbled and inhuman, sounding more like a duck than a person. Zed hovers nearby with graham crackers, untroubled by his friend's plight. Cleo is perched on one of the windowsills like a content undead cat, calmly poking a needle in and out of a bundle of fabric. Etho curls next to her, somehow managing to fold his lanky limbs up onto the ledge. They observe the chaos with matching gazes of calculation and amusement. TFC and Joe are tucked into the quietest corner possible, noses buried in books while they ignore the chaos around them. Jevin tries to sneak up on them, but TFC plucks a rock from his pocket and chucks it at the intruder. The pebble sinks into Jevin's face with a bloop, and he scuttles back towards a cackling Hypno. It's chaos. It's perfect. It's so inexplicably home that Green has to stand in the doorway for a long, long moment, simply soaking it all in, and watching as False perches in the rafters with a screeching B-dubs as her hostage, as Doc constructs a miniature catapult out of forks, redstone, and cheerspite, as Tortoise tries to hold a conversation with Beef, and keeps getting pelted with blueberries from Nettie and Salem. The first to catch sight of them is Martin, deep in conversation with Wren, but ever aware of his surroundings. His eyes flick up to the two figures hovering in the doorway, and his face splits into a sunny grin. He throws his hands up, nearly smacking Wren in the face, and has one thing to say. Hey! Wren whips his head around to the doorway, spots Green, and immediately does the same. Hey! In groups of 2 or 3 or 5, the room joins in, almost like it was scripted. But there's no scripting the sheer stupid joy of a whole room flinging their arms into the air and yelling a long, wordless cheer at the same time. Hey! Green is laughing, though he's unsure when he started. Jimmy flows his hands up and so does Green, wings flaring wide as he joins in the chorus, yelling their victory to the high vaulting roof and the sky beyond. It feels so good to be home. The chaos returns to what it was, and if possible, the energy in the room only doubles. Now that Green's emerged, now that they've seen he's okay, the mood is so light and overjoyed that Green feels like he's chugging several leaping potions, like he could spring into the air and never come down. Wells emerges from the kitchen, blonde hair pulled back in a small ponytail, and balancing more plates on one arm than should be humanly possible. Food! He bellows, and the players let out another cheer. They pile around the table, yelps and indignant scuffles breaking out as each tries to get to their share. scrambling around players and, in the case of Tango and Zeb, practically climbing over other people in effort to reach their destination. In the meantime, Mumbo and Stress follow Wells out of the kitchen, bearing even more food. Nettie, Etho, and Exuma immediately duck behind them in order to lend assistance with the unbelievable amount of food that's been apparently cooked up. Green finally lets himself travel further into the room, settling down into his unusual chair and tidily tucking his wings against his back. He sat next to Pearl and Beef, and the hermit reaches out to ruffle his hair with an instinct calloused hands. "Welcome back," he says with his usual crooked smile, and Green can't help but grin. "Good to be home," he replies, and he's never put more sincerity into anything ever. He turns away before he starts crying again, and grabs the stack of pancakes directly in front of him. For the next long while, it's relatively calm. The players set aside whatever shenanigans they were enacting before the meal, and seem content to simply enjoy each other's company, passing around platters and chatting aimlessly about everything and nothing at once. During this time, Pearl quietly updates him on what they've learned, filling in the gaps that Exuma left in his story and explaining everything in more detail. That's how he's introduced to the concept of listeners. Pearl promises to tell him more about that can of worms later. He meets Pix, Zloy, and Lara. The two watchers and listener sit in a clump towards the other end of the table, but Pearl simply communicates with Laura using strange hand signals and translates for Green. It's an admittedly strange and silent conversation, but Green comes out the other side giggling. He's not sure what to think about the other watchers just yet. They did help the hermits find him, and also, according to Pearl, stood up to Turkson. True, but they're still watchers. He doesn't quite know how he feels about that. The fact that their wings were cut off, he decides is another matter for another day. He can't help the full body shudder that sweeps through him when Pearl tells him that, terror making him freeze like he's sunk waist deep into the snow. He can't help but imagine the same thing happening to him, losing his wings, being grounded forever, no longer able to reach for the sky. Before he can spiral, he watches Pearl's gaze across the table, and the watcher's deep blue eyes flash with a faint purple light. Green feels a small nudge to his mind. Nothing intrusive, nothing big. It's the barest hint of a whisper, but it's a warm whisper, a comforting one that sends reassurance and support in a single moment. It helps ground him in the here and now, and he takes a deep breath, clutching his fork tighter. "Safe, okay?" the presence seems to ask, and Green meets Pix' eyes again and nods, the barest dip of his head. Pix nods back, and the presence is gone again, leaving behind the barest hint of warmth. Green decides that should also be left for later. He has a lot of questions for Pix and Zloy. The last new face is one that isn't entirely new. He sits at the very end of the table, sandwiched between Exuma and Zed, arms crossed and stiff, shoulders brought up as far as they'll go. He's practically a mirror to Exuma. The same armored outfit and helmet, same broad shoulders and height. The only difference is the red and black color scheme, a stark contrast to Exuma's soothing green. As it turns out, he's the one Green remembers from the end, the one with the terrifying weapon and quiet laugh. His name is EX, which spawns a world of confusion because Green knows that Exuma is also X. "Yeah, it doesn't make a lot of sense to me either," Pearl admits when she asks about the names. "I think it's a nickname. They sure haven't explained it, though." judging from EX's tense stance, and one word replies. He won't be explaining it anytime soon. Green wonders why he's here in the first place, but decides it's none of his business. If Exuma trusts him, so will Green. Somewhat. He's not getting anywhere near the shotgun. Breakfast cheerfully tumbles and gallops on, food disappearing from plates and chatter rising and falling like waves. Green lets all it surround him, a steady hum of familiar voices and soothing conversation. When most of the food is gone and people start leaving in small groups, Pearl taps on Green's shoulder. Gotta talk to you for a second, if that's okay, she asks. And Green immediately nods and pushes back from the table, grabbing one more hand of blueberries before tailing his sister out the door. They end up somewhere outside, sitting on a craggy outcropping with the base behind them. Green spreads his wings and allows the wind to brush through them, feeling much better now that they've been preened. He's warm and content, full from breakfast and safe with family. I've been talking with Pixen's Loy, Pearl says, and the content feeling withers away in an instant. Green's shoulders stiffen, and he draws his wings back until they're resting against his back. He doesn't meet Pearl's eyes. Yeah? According to Watcher standards, they're pretty young, younger than most of the collective, which according to my research have been around for a long time. But they've spent a lot of time with the listeners, who are apparently just as old as the Watchers, if not older. And they've heard certain things from them. Oh? Green picks at his nails, trying not to show that he's admittedly somewhat intrigued. Like what? Well, Pearl glances down at her own hands. Apparently, their history says that Watchers weren't always bad. That a long time ago, they were allied with the listeners, and that they didn't mess with players like they do now. They watched over mortals and guided them through danger. They were protectors and observers. And then something happened. They lost sight of who they were, and lost their true purpose. They began to play with the lives of those they've sworn to protect. So the listeners cut ties with them so they wouldn't be targeted as well. But there's also stories that some of the Watchers still try to hold on to their original mission. That a small group split away from the whole, desperately clinging to their old ideals. Green forgets about his nails and instead stares openly at Pearl in shock. He's never even imagined that the Watchers could have once been good. They're evil. That's what he's convinced himself of. That's what he knows. They're cruel and emotionless and change things. He doesn't even want to think about the possibility that they might not all be like that. Even the consideration is enough to send him reeling, upturning everything he's ever known. They might just be stories, Pearl says softly. She reaches out to tint a wing against his back. But what if they're not? Pearl, please, one crisis at a time, Green replies dryly, ignoring the fluttering of his panicked heart. And Pearl breaks into peals of laughter. She continues giggling as her head flops onto his shoulder, hair spilling down over his red sweater. You're right. I'm sorry, she says with a sigh. I should have at least waited a little. Green hums but doesn't say anything. The easy apology and subsequent forgiveness flowing between them without words, just as naturally as they once did. They sit like that for a while more, Pearl's head on Green's shoulder and their wings tangled in a loving mess. I think I should talk to them, Green says, and they both know who he's talking about. Pearl rises and offers him a hand, which he accepts and allows her to haul him up and onto his feet. They wander back into the base, arm in arm, content with each other's company. They find Pix and Zloy in one of the offices, where Grian is subjugated to the overwhelming mess of paper and devices that fill the room, tacked up on the walls and scattered across the floor, old books and new keyboards and everything in between. Pix stands up as they come in, but Zloy simply gives them a two-finger salute and buries his nose back in the giant book he's holding. Grian catches a glimpse of complex diagrams before Zloy spins his chair around and blocks his view. "Hello, Pearl," Pix greets, coming to meet them at the door. "And Grian, come in. Don't mind the mess." "You want me to stick around, or are you okay?" Pearl asks Grian, and he hesitates for a moment, wavering between sending her away and begging her to stay with him. He glances over at Zloy, half hidden by the book, and at Pix, whose bright blue eyes hold nothing but warmth. He thinks of what Pearl told him about their story, and the presents at breakfast that helped him when he almost spiraled. "I'll be fine," he says, barely conscious of the words. Pearl presses a quick kiss to his forehead and leaves, closing the door softly behind her. Grian is left in the room with two renegade watchers. He shoves his hands in his pockets to keep them from shaking. "I wanted to say thank you," he says, "because that seems like a good place to start." Zloy scoffs, closing his book and tossing it on the table with a thunk. "Don't worry about it. It was a pleasure to get back at the Watchers. We'll never refuse a friend in need." Grian blinks. "Pearl said you didn't even know the Hermits before all of this." Technicalities." Pix waves a dismissive hand and flops backwards onto a chair. Grian takes this as an invitation to go further into the room, and he perches on the edge of a cluttered desk. "An enemy of my enemy is a friend and all that, yeah? Anyways, we weren't completely in the dark. Hard to find someone who hasn't heard of Hermitcraft." Grian hums and ponders this for a moment. Zloy and Pix don't rush him, a comfortable silence filling the room. "I don't remember a lot from the end," he admits, "but Pearl filled me in. You told the Watchers that Hermitcraft is under your protection? Does that mean you claimed it?" He's not sure why the concept upsets him so much. It's such a silly word. Claimed. But something deep and instinctual in him screams at the thought. Furious, livid anger, white hot and sharp, at the thought of these two wingless Watchers staking any kind of claim on his home, his hermit. Pix laughs and holds up his hands as a gesture of surrender. Something small and knowing pokes at the corner of his eyes, in the curve of his smile. "Don't worry, we haven't touched a single block here. That was just a ploy to get the Watchers to back off. Hermitcraft will still have ours and the listener's protection, if you still wish it, but no claim is active here other than your own. It's all yours, bud," Zloy adds. And something in Grian simply melts. His wings relax in a way they haven't quite been able to since he first heard about the confrontation in the end, and the silent, wordless thank you reverberates through his entire being, like he can simply project the thought across the room to Zloy and Pix. Apparently, he can, because they both go still for a moment, the minute he thinks it, eyes lighting up. Pix huffs has a laugh, and Zloy gives him a toothy grin. And then there's two small friendly nudges, one that feels exactly like the present at breakfast, and one that is completely new. "You're welcome," the nudges say, without a single word being spoken aloud. And Grian understands that this is how the collective was supposed to function, supposed to work. Gentle nudges and a steady presence, the support of someone similar yet different at the same time. Grian wrinkles his nose and gives them both a nudge. That's the equivalent of sticking his tongue out. And Lloyd starts laughing so hard he nearly falls out of his chair. Exuma sits at the edge of the island, legs dangling over the side and over the yawning abyss below. He's not wearing his helmet or his gloves. Most of his armor is gone, safely stowed away into his inventory. He feels strange without it, too. Too light and too empty, bare, exposed. The end is the only place he allows himself to be like this, where he breathes so deeply his lungs possibly can't hold all the air, and the void sings to him softly. He sings back sometimes, but today he simply sits in silence and contemplates everything. His players are in higher spirits than they have been for ages. With Green finally safe with them again, projects are finally being completed, and belongings are getting organized as the Hermits start preparing for the inevitable shift between seasons. The universe has been slowly inching towards an update, and the Hermits hope to start a new world along with the new change. There's a lot of work to be done. Exuma knows that. A few of the Hermits plan on taking breaks from the chaos of family, while other old friends wish to return to the familiarity of home. There's code to be written, a world to be formed, and players to prepare for the update. But that can all be done later. For now, he simply sits and breathes, listening to the hum of the universe in his ears. He allows himself to stop worrying for one mere moment and simply be. He hears the new arrival before he sees him, the rustle of wings, the soft padding of footsteps too light to be human, the intake of breath before speech. "Who tattled on me this time?" Exuma asks, languidly, leaning his head back with his eyes closed. Quiet laughter rings out, much airier than it would have been in the overworld. Maybe I'm just really intuitive. Did you think of that? Mm-hmm. Sit down, Grian. You're hovering too much. I'm not hovering, Grian snips, but dutifully settles down next to his admin and swings his legs over the edge. EX told me you were here. I knew it, Exuma replies tonelessly, and Green giggles again. He kicks his feet and leans over to look into the void, practically bent in half. Exuma puts out a preemptive hand to stop him from tumbling off. Everyone's a right mess, Green says, straightening up again and leaning back on his hands, running around like beetles. And no one's telling me what's happening. It's very rude of them, I tell you. Exuma laughs, imagining a confused Green smack dab in the middle of the Hermit's frantic packing. He can only imagine what it must look like to the outside eyes. The universe is getting ready for an update, and we're getting ready with it, he explains, reaching out and dragging a gentle hand through the code, thick air, practically buzzing with magic. It's going to be a big one, so instead of dragging Season 5 through it like we usually would, we've decided it's time to move to a new world. He flicks his fingers, scattering sparks of code, before glancing at Grian. I hope you'll join us for Season 6, my friend. Grian laughs delightfully, a joyful thing that bounces and rolls like sunshine. He grins at Exuma, eyes dark and sparkling. Of course I'm coming along, he says, and there's no room for doubt or hesitance in his voice. You can't get rid of me that easily. He shrugs and tilts his head slightly, gazing out into the void. Anyways, the Avo crew left a few days ago. Pearl's gone on her journey of self-discovery, or whatever. It's not like I've got anything else to do. Exuma grins, a stupid, happy feeling bubbling up in his chest. He won't admit it, but he's been hedging around the question for several days now, scared of the response. Now that Green's memories are back, now that he knows who he is, does he really need the hermits anymore? Does he need Hermitcraft? Of course I'm coming along, he says. Like it's the simplest thing in the world. Like there's no questioning to be had. I'm glad to hear it, Exuma says, as earnestly as he can, and Green chuckles. He shimmies closer and rests his head on the admin's shoulder, uncaring of the Voidwalker's indescribable face, blind to the shattering scars, ignorant to the fact that his people and Exuma's were never meant to be friends. Somehow, in some strange, unexpected twist of fate, the universe guided them to each other. Two lost souls, hurt and broken in ways very few could understand, clinging so desperately to the last shreds of their hope, refusing to let that spark go out, fighting with every breath in their body until they were safe. A Voidwalker and a Watcher sit together, and the silence wraps around them like the cool embrace of the void. They are, who they once were, and who they will always be. They are home. And that is the end of It Hurts the Hope. Thank you for listening.